Morning, everybody. Happy look at your email inbox and cry day. And welcome to the first news agenda of 2023. Woo! With me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's Deputy Political Editor, Ben Glaze. Good morning, Ben. Happy New Year.
Morning. Happy New Year. Lovely to see you again.
How's your email inbox?
Well, I've been working for the past weeks. And I'm one of those weird people who has to clear their inbox. I've never got more than like 10 unread emails at any one point.
That's not cleared. That's still got 10 unread.
Well, that's true. I can cope with that.
Now, there may be a new year, but nothing's changed around here. This is the People's Pay-Per-View. So get into the comments, ask us your questions. We'll do our best to answer them for you. Those of you listening later on podcast will just have to self-medicate at home instead. So what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on the ghosts of Christmas past with a front page picture of the last 5 Tory prime ministers. Oh, God, I don't want to see any of them again, who it believes are responsible for today's crisis in the NHS. Now, this comes as the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, makes a major speech today, setting out his priorities for the next year. And it will follow Health Secretary Steve Barclay yesterday claiming that the problems in the NHS were down to COVID, flu and strep A. Now, Ben, that implies, if Steve Barclay's right, that implies that A, it's normal for this time of year, B, it'll all be over by April when those bugs go away, and C, of course, that it doesn't require any more money to deal with. Now, is Rishi going to agree with him when he gets up and starts speaking later?
Yeah, I think the Prime Minister will say that, seasonal illnesses are certainly exacerbating the problems in the NHS. Steve Barclay yesterday, as you said, blamed COVID, blamed strep A, blamed flu. Now, part of that is true. We mustn't like to say it's all not the case, because there is a slight resurgence in COVID. But then if you look at the stats, there's more strep A than there has been in recent years, and certainly a lot more flu. And part of the reason that is we're mixing more, there are no lockdown restrictions, and we weren't exposed to these illnesses over the past 3 years. Past 3 years, and we're now catching them. So we hadn't built up immunity. That said, when you look at the statistics, there were 2.5 million people on NHS waiting lists in 2010. That's now up to 7.2 million. So that meant there were still 2.5 million people waiting then. Problems have certainly got worse, but the lack of funding, I'm just looking through some of the stats in here. The Health Foundation analysis shows average day-to-day health spending in the UK between 2010 and 2019 was £3,005 per person. That's 18% below the average of the 14 original EU countries, which stood at £3,655. So there is a lack of money going in, which the government would say, we're always putting more and more in. But the fact is, it's never enough, is it? Particularly not when 2/3 of the NHS bill is its staffing costs. And there are still 133,000 vacancies in the NHS.
Exactly. And when you've got a lot of vacancies, actually staffing costs more because you have to spend more on retention, you have to spend more on recruitment, you have to spend more on getting people from overseas who cost more to recruit than people in this country, blah, 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 blah. It actually costs more to run something down than it does to run it.
The staff who are working, because there's not enough staff, the ones who are working are under more pressure. Therefore, they're more likely to, catch illnesses, go off sick with stress, be burnt out, that sort of thing as well.
Yeah. Now, Copite Mark, who appears to be a Liverpool supporter, just a thought, if the Tories start to privatise the NHS before they're booted out, could Labour reverse it? Yes, in theory, any government can reverse what the previous governments have done. However, the process of starting to privatise, who knows when you could say that began? Did it begin under Margaret Thatcher in the 80s when Ken Clarke introduced the internal market? Did it begin or carry on under Labour, under Blair and Brown when they had private finance initiatives which just loaded hospitals with debt? Is it actually not actually started yet and we're still yet to see it? There are private companies providing healthcare now. They were paid billions during the pandemic to clear waiting lists. And look what Ben just told us. Didn't make any difference. Billions went to private healthcare during the pandemic to do the non-urgent stuff. And they had got no reason to do it well, because the contracts didn't say you only get paid if the waiting list come down. They just say you got paid per bit. So, who knows? And it was whether or not Labour could fix it, I suppose, without having any further private finance involved in the whole process. But get into the comments, ask us your questions. What do you think about the state of the NHS? Is it all down to the Tories, as the front page of the Mirror claims, or is there other stuff going on? Is it really COVID and flu, and we get through this period and it will all be okay? Let us know. Now, inside on pages 4 and 5, is a good explanation, if to my mind, of why Steve Barclay is a prat, who must think we're all prats. Now, the main story across the top there about the NHS being unsafe, that quotes numerous medical specialists pointing out why it's the Tories' fault. But there may be some among our viewers who think that's just typical Mirror lefty politics, blaming the Tories. So I will direct you instead to that down page story, What's Killing Our NHS, along the bottom across the fold, which explains in analytical detail how the NHS funding, for example, used to be about 4% increase a year to keep up with demographic and scientific changes, and actually went down to 1% under Cameron, how the real terms wage cuts have led to people leaving the workplace, which means 1 in 10 NHS jobs are empty, and that while numerous governments of all sorts since the 1970s have tried to cut the number of hospital beds to give more care in the community, since 2010, funding for that care has been slashed. So not much use. Now, Ben, despite all these facts, some people will still say it's still a matter of politics with the NHS. And I suspect from the briefings we've had and his New Year's message, ridiculously upbeat New Year's message, that Rishi's speech today will be a bit like the government of Boris Johnson. Lots of insistence that all is well, things will be better, some unfunded promises, perhaps re-announcements, absolutely diddly squat of real impact. Do you have any idea what he's going to be saying?
Well, us privileged journalists in the parliamentary lobby, we get a trail of every politician when they do a big speech. The night before, we usually get some embargoed words, which we can put on the internet at 10:30, but can carry in today's papers, setting out what they are expected to say. Now, of course, if there's a 4,000 word speech, we might get 300 words of that, and that is what the government or Labour, whoever is making the speech, chooses to give you in advance to try and set out what they're going to say. And now you would think with the various crises, not just the NHS crisis, but obviously there's the migrant crisis with 46,000 people coming across the channel last year. There's various public sector strikes, including not being able to get to work, hence why I'm doing this from home today, because I can't get into the office because of the rail strikes. Instead, Rishi Sunak, according to the words we had from Downing Street last night, he's going to talk about mathematics, and how he wants children in England to study maths until they're 18. Now, I have to be honest, as someone who hated maths at school, I really did hate it. It sounds
when
awful.
I could ditch maths was a happy day.
Yeah, I could not wait to finish doing maths. I had to have a tutor as well. Every Saturday morning for I think it was 3 hours on a Saturday morning, just so I could get a C at GCSE maths. It was awful.
Oh God! Well, when I was at school 1,000 years ago, they changed it so you had to do maths until GCSE, and that actually meant by the time you got to GCSE, you're doing actually quite advanced maths. There's a lot of stuff in there which you don't use in daily life, put it that way. And it was a bit painful for people like us whose natural skill is words and not numbers, to having to do it for another 2 years into A-level. I had some friends who did A-level maths, and do you know what? They never spoke a normal language as far as I was concerned. They were Rain Man to the rest of us. It was to have to do that level of maths that long. I think it's a bit excessive. So we'll have to see, I suppose, what Rishi's going to talk about exactly. But, maths, double maths is not going to light anyone's fire, I suspect, unless Rain Man is actually listening. Now, we do have some comments about the NHS. Now, Mike says, Rishi says, Rishi may not really want people to be better educated in maths, or they'll figure out that when inflation is 10%, more than 10%, a 5% deal is a pay cut. Of course, and if he talks about maths, Mike, he's going to get asked some fairly basic questions about how on earth you're going to find 47,000 nurses when you're cutting things by real terms here, or how you're going to find more warships when you're cutting defence in real terms, and so on and so forth. So yes, unfortunately, some of the journalists who are there will have done maths. Some of them even to A-level standards, maybe even with a private tutor like Mr. Privileged Ben over there, and may actually be able to do some sums while they're stood there on their feet, especially if they've got a notepad in front of them. I keep asking us your questions. What do you think about double maths? What do you think about having to do maths a bit longer? Is that going to make a huge difference to your life? Will it mean, as Rishi seems to want, that we all go into a life and a career in finance and being in city bankers, because that's the only way to happiness and success? Now, Mike says, I wouldn't worry, I'm a maths geek. This policy will not happen. There is a crisis in maths teaching already. They'll never get the extra maths teachers they need. He wants a distraction from all the other crises. Hopefully, Ben, there'll be someone who's done some sums about the number of maths teachers and the number of maths teachers required, and be able to point that out to Rishi later on, won't they? Because this is one of the first times he's facing like a lot of journalists all at once to in a big press conference asking a lot of questions.
That's right. This is his first big set-piece speech as Prime Minister. This number 10, this Downing Street under Rishi Sunak, it's tried to sort of calm things down, quieten things down. You know, there's 49 days of chaos under Liz Truss and various pictures of wearing hard hats and going in high vis to buildings, so that sort of thing. I'm not seeing Rishi Sunak do that deliberately. They've just wanted to let things play out and sort of take the sting, draw the sting out of politics. And to a certain extent that has worked, but it has meant he's not done more than, I think he did one press conference when he was on a foreign trip, but he's not done a huge press conference where you get 10 journalist questions, perhaps. Whether he'll take that many today, I don't know. But when he does this speech, he will have to take questions from journalists. There is a plan for a Q&A afterwards. And much as you might like to talk about maths, and there may be, I've done God knows how many of these press conferences with Q&As afterwards, you do have token questions thrown in about the policy that the Prime Minister or the leader, whoever, wants to talk about. But then we move on to the issues of the day, which will be rail strikes, which will be NHS crisis, which will be Channel migrant crisis. Rishi Sunak won't have it on his own terms. And you get some bizarre. I remember when Theresa May was Prime Minister, and she went to the London Wetlands Centre in southwest London, and she made quite a very interesting speech actually about climate change and environment, which all anyone wanted to talk about was her future and Brexit. And it was quite embarrassing. I don't think there was one single question on the environment. You felt quite sorry for her because it was a genuinely important issue, but it wasn't what people were talking about. And she rather stoically took all the questions, answered as much as a Prime Minister ever answers a question, answered them. And then afterwards, the aides were just like, no one's asked about climate change. It's a massive issue.
Poor guys. Who'd want to work in government? Not us, that's for sure. Now, elsewhere in the paper, it reports that the unions want to settle many of their numerous pay disputes, and it's the government not coming to the table, not the other way around. And it also says elsewhere that Britain is set to have the worst economy out of developed nations, with a slower and shallower recovery that many people link to Brexit, according to a survey of leading economists. So Rishi's got a lot to do. He's got a lot on his plate, Ben, and he's got a lot to promise in that speech today. Is he going to? He can't, can he? What a stupid question. Is he going to be able to offer a fix for it? He can't. There's no way he can fix all that in one speech.
No, there isn't. And he's not a great speech maker as well. During the Tory leadership hustings over the summer, the one that Liz Truss won, and obviously we've ended up with Rishi Sunak's Prime Minister.
Well, when Liz Truss seemed like the best bet.
He wasn't great at making speeches. It's not something that comes that naturally to him. He's actually better when he's doing off the cuff stuff. Weirdly, but he's not a great orator, and he won't have all the answers today, which is perhaps why he wants to talk about maths most of all, because it's something he actually does feel passionate about. Because remember, he's an investment banker. He worked for Goldman Sachs, and he's very highly educated, Winchester College, and the best educations money can buy. If he wants to talk about maths, well, great, he can talk about maths, but that isn't going to be what the questions are about. And this is the New Year launch as well. It's quite a stereotype that prime ministers and leaders of the opposition do this. We've got a speech by Keir Starmer coming up tomorrow, also in London, they will set out what they want to be talking about for the months and the year ahead. Well, it doesn't pan out like that. I mean, look what's happened in 2022, where everything was thrown into flux on February the 24th when Russia invaded Ukraine. So whatever speeches prime ministers may have made in the early days of January then, or leaders of the opposition in the early days of January then, well, that was all blown off course pretty quickly.
Yeah, events, dear boy, events take over all politics, don't they? Now, keep asking your questions. What do you think Rishi should be promising to fix all these problems? Should they be getting around the table to negotiate? Now, at the moment, there's a new poll out overnight which shows that Labour is on 47 points. The Tories are on 27. So promising things that they might do after the next election, which he probably won't win. Yeah, not necessarily that great. He's probably going to get a rough ride later on. But on our second story of the day, on page 21, it reports that 1 in 3 teachers quit inside 5 years of qualifying. Now, Scottish teachers are already going out on strike. English teachers are currently balloting for a strike, and that's not people who teach English, it's people who are in England and teaching, are balloting for a strike. Now, the government is being urged to negotiate before the ballot closes on January the 13th, a mere 9 days away. But in typical fashion, the government seems to be taking the same line it has and everything else, and refusing to talk to the unions, insisting all is well, and that it is spending an extra £2 billion on schools this year, next year, and the year after. Now, we've seen that's not worked with any of the other industrial disputes they've got on their desks, Ben. Is it going to work with schools where people do actually do maths?
Probably not, no. Yeah, like I said, the ballot for industrial action closes in a week Friday, and I'd expect that the unions will back industrial action, and in a few weeks or months we'll be facing strikes from teachers. Some of the stats in this piece about the number of newly qualified teachers who leave the profession within 5 years, they're really startling, actually. I just want to pull some of them out. 116,532 new teachers have begun the career in the last 5 years. But of that 116,500, only 90,000 are still in the classroom. So that's 26,443 who qualified in the last 5 years, went into teaching and then left. So they're not enjoying the experience, quite clearly. And I can imagine that. I wouldn't want to be a teacher, but lots of people do. It's one of those, the worthiest professions that people can go into. But clearly, some people are going into it and hating it and leaving quite quickly. Now, part of the reason for that might be the pay. Certainly when the rubber hits the road and they realise what they're getting paid and what they're having to deal with in classrooms and how their hands are tied on certain issues, then, they're obviously realising it's not for them. And, of course, a lot of these people who've gone through teacher training, of course, there's a big investment in them. So it's not great all round.
No, exactly. It's not something people go into lightly. Usually it's not something people just go on a whim and they go, I didn't like it, I'm going to do something else. You've got to go through a fair bit of effort. You've got to have degree qualifications and so on and so forth. You've got to invest some money and some time in it. And it says in the piece here that 1 in 8 quit in the first year. 1 in 4 quit within 3 years. And 1 in 2 are planning to go in the next 5. So that's half of all teachers going, stuff this. I'm out. I'm going to go and have a massive career in investment banking instead, which Rishi would presumably support. So there has to be a way of getting some more teachers in schools. There has to be a way of keeping those teachers happier when they're there, and perhaps not teaching in buildings like the one at my daughter's school, which has a hole so big that you can put your fist through to the outside, which is not very good and doesn't involve, how many schools are like that? How many schools have got leaking or collapsing roofs? There was a piece in Private Eye this week, Ben, about public buildings that were built between 1950 and 1980. They used a particular kind of concrete roof support, which was popular at the time. So it's in hospitals, it's in public buildings, it's in schools, it's in libraries, and it's crud and it's all rotting. And so ceilings and roofs are collapsing all over the country because they use this stuff. And that requires a massive nationwide building program to fix.
Sounds cheap.
Sounds cheap. Sounds easy, doesn't it? But it also requires someone to actually grasp it and see that there's a problem, and that it's not just an NHS problem or an education problem. It's nationwide. It's the entire public sector. Needs a new roof, literally. Put a new roof on everything and fix half these problems. Anyway, we'll have to see how any of that works out, won't we? But January the 13th, the closure of that ballot, and then no doubt perhaps some more strike action if they can get over the required level. What is the level they're supposed to get for strikes, Ben?
It's 40% of a 50% turnout.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that. I haven't got the figures on top of my head.
They've got to hit a certain mandate before they're allowed to do it. And then we're going to have teachers, posties, physiotherapists, nurses. Who else isn't on strike? Who knows? Whereas a journalist did strike, of course, and got their pay rise. So not in a position to complain. So keep asking us your questions and comments. We'll do our best to answer them for you. Anne-Marie says, education needs to be put back into the hands of the experts, the teachers. That's what they've claimed to do for years, Anne-Marie, with grant-maintained schools and then what are they called now? Academies. And goodness knows what else. And it actually means that teachers are doing more of the bureaucracy as far as I can tell. So they're not really doing so much teaching as they were. We'll have to find out how it all pans out in the next couple of weeks as 2023 turns into, well, just a continuation of 2022, really. So we'll have to see how that goes. But first off, thank you for your questions, everybody. But first, before we go, we have got some good news. We've found some for you. It's on Ben's favourite topic. And here it is. Now, human beings do lots of... It's a shame that this is on that particular page with the wife accused of murdering her husband. But human beings do lots of silly things around New Year's. This year was no exception when one couple decided to climb England's highest mountain on January the 1st and got lost when it became dark. This is a story. It's on the top left of that page, all right? It's not about the couple who were involved in a murder. It's the top left, that little story. So a couple climbed Scafell Pike, got a bit lost. And anyway, 9 volunteers from Keswick Mountain Rescue Team searched Scafell Pike for 4 hours without success until Isla the rescue dog, who we have a photograph of, there she is, bolted off without warning in the pitch black, look at that, bless her, and led them to a gully where the couple were found. And one of them had suffered a panic attack as they tried to find their way back. So without Isla, they'd still be stuck there. Ben, is this proof that dogs really are a man's best friend? Because you'd never get a cat doing this, would you?
You wouldn't get a cat doing this, no. And
Can you imagine a cat going off to a gully and going, "It's all right, everyone, I found them, I've rescued them."
They just curl up and have a sleep, wouldn't it? No, this dog does appear to be a useful dog, which are the ones that I like, the ones that have. Isla, who I'm reliably informed is a collie cross, seems to have done a great job here in finding this couple. Normally when we do couples rescue or people rescued off mountainsides in the dark, there's silly people who've gone in flip-flops and shorts and a t-shirt and have taken a mobile phone that's got 10% battery, etc. The mountain rescue team are keen to stress that was not the case with this couple. They had actually gone equipped, but they got lost on the way down, which I suppose can happen to anyone. And the experts, the mountain rescue team, hadn't been able to find them. And then Isla the dog darts off and finds them in this steep gully. So fair play to Isla the dog, who can't go quite as far as to say she saved this couple's lives, but quite possibly she did.
Well, if they found them the next day or something, they'd have had a lot of exposure, hypothermia, and be pretty ill. So Isla has definitely earned her biscuits that particular day. And like I say, if there was a cat who worked for... Keswick Mountain Rescue don't have a cat on the team for a very good reason, I suspect, which is that if you said, "Quick, Felix, there's a couple lost on Scafell Pike, what do we do?" Felix would go, "Well, I'm not leaving the fire." And just curl up and say, "Silly idiots, what are they doing out there anyway this time of year?" So that's why cats are rubbish and dogs are the best, as we have often said on this show, and we'll continue saying as long as I run it. Right. Thank you, everybody, for your questions and taking part. Well done, everyone, for turning out at 9 o'clock on the 4th of January. I know lots of people aren't back at work or school until later this week or next week, but we decided to start early because we had a long time off over Christmas. So we shall have to see how it all goes in the next year, but we'll be back next Monday for another edition of the News Agenda Explained with another guest, because Ben will no doubt have to have a bit of a break from coming on this show. One of our regulars. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. If you're listening on podcast, please leave us a review so other people can find us. And we will see you all again on Monday for another edition of the News Agenda Explained. Bye-bye.